Well, it's July 2022, there's a ton of conflicting opinions out there about the housing market, the world feels a little bit chaotic, and it's difficult to make sense of it all. So it's time to check in and see what's actually happening with the housing market, both nationally and locally here in Spokane. My name is Phil Wells, I'm a real estate agent that likes to keep up to date with the market, and I want you to be as informed as possible too. In this video, we're going to look at national pending home sales, we'll look at mortgage rates as well as mortgage application rates. And we'll of course look at the Spokane market itself. We'll then move on to look at some real estate news as well as some macroeconomic news that stood out to me this month. Then at the end we'll try piece all this information together and see if we can make sense of the market as we see it right now in July 2022. Looking first at national pending home sales. Just a quick note, the figures throughout this video are the latest figures that are available, but there is often a lag when it comes to reporting this data, particularly at the national level. Contract signings were up slightly, 0.7% month over month in May 2022. Year-over-year contract signings declined 13.6%, which represents 12 consecutive months of year-over-year sales declines. Where I am in the western region, sales declined 5% month over month, and they declined 19.8% from the prior year. Here's what the National Association of Realtors chief economist had to say. Despite the small gain in pending home sales from the prior month, the housing market is clearly undergoing a transition. Contract signings are down sizably from a year ago, because of much higher mortgage rates. According to the National Association of Realtors, at the median single-family home price, with a 10% down payment, the monthly mortgage payment has increased by about $800 a month since the beginning of the year, as mortgage rates have climbed by 2.5% since January. Trying to balance the housing market by choking off demand via higher mortgage rates is damaging the consumer and the economy. The better way to balance the market is through increased supply, which also helps the broader economy. So the National Association of Realtors chief economist there calling for action to help supply rather than stifling buyers with higher interest rates. And I must admit, I completely agree with him here. A large amount of the inflation that we've been seeing in the housing market and the economy more broadly is due to supply issues, in my opinion. So it hardly makes sense to me for the Federal Reserve to be raising interest rates and squeezing the already heavily squeezed consumer. That doesn't make more lumber arrive on time, and that certainly doesn't make more gas arrive at pumps. Obviously, the Fed is just trying to address inflation here, and they really only have this one tool by which to do that. But are they doing things responsibly, or are they trying to crack an egg with a sledgehammer? The upshot is that we still have a housing shortage, but fewer people that are able to afford to buy homes. As this economist pointed out, the family hoping to buy a median-priced home are going to pay $800 a month more than if they were buying in January. If you are considering selling your home right now, know that there are still some very serious buyers out there. But I am seeing a lot more homes stay on the market for longer than they would have done at the start of the year. If you have a home with very broad appeal in a very desirable area, you're going to be fine, you're going to sell it quickly, and you're likely to profit handsomely from the deal. But if you're sitting on something that's a little bit unique or in a less desirable area, you're likely to encounter longer days on market than you would have even just a few months ago. Either way, you will need to be a little bit more conscious about how you price your home, and be careful not to list ahead of the market. And remember, if you do decide to list your Spokane area home for sale, please allow me to be your listing agent. I would be honored to work with you. Let's move on to look at mortgage rates. After all, most people are buying using a mortgage, so to keep an eye on mortgage rates gives us a really good idea of where buyer demand is heading. Rates are also a major headline right now. A lot of people will have seen that the average mortgage rate dropped to 5.3%. So it's important to check in and see what's actually happening with mortgage rates, because after all, they're in flux daily. Sticking with May for a second, mortgage rates at the start of May were at 5.55%, and by the end of May they were at 5.36%. So a steady trend downwards there in the month of May. The most recent rates I could see have risen to 5.84%, having spiked massively in mid-June to 6.28%, which was right around the announcement that the federal funds rate would increase another 0.75% to 1.75%. With inflation still in the mid-8% range, I think it's highly probable that the Fed will continue to squeeze the consumer by continuing to raise interest rates, until such time as inflation comes under control. But if we see signs that inflation is beginning to decline, then hopefully the Fed won't feel the need to continue to raise interest rates. And maybe that will send a signal of stability to the overall market, and mortgage rates will begin to fall on their own. After all, mortgage rates are up 2.5% since the start of the year, whereas in the same time frame, the Fed funds rate is only up 1.5%. So there's a whole percent there that mortgage rates could drop on their own. So rates are up substantially this year, but are holding steady in the fives. At this point, it's important to remember that there's no bad time to buy real estate, and you're not stuck with your high interest rate. Refinances are possible at a later date when rates do come back down. You can also explore adjustable rate mortgages, which seem to be becoming much more popular recently. If you are willing to compete in this market as a buyer, you will face substantially reduced competition than if you were buying at the same time last year. It's actually the most favorable market conditions we've seen for buyers in the last couple of years, if you're prepared to stomach the rates, which will come as a relief to those that maybe dropped out of the market last year because it was too competitive. If I'm describing you right now, now is the time to re-enter the market. It's important to remember as well what the economist from the previous section said only last month, namely that home prices aren't going anywhere. In his opinion, he expects them to rise 5% in 2022. So if you're concerned that you're going to sign on the dotted line for your home and the market is going to crash, leaving you underwater, then just know this. Right now, as we see it, there are no signs that point to that being a reality. And I'll touch on this more when we look at news articles later in this video. Sticking with mortgages for a second, I'm moving on to look at mortgage application rates. After all, it doesn't matter what a mortgage rate's at if nobody's actually applying for a loan after all. So let's head over to the Mortgage Bankers Association, the MBA, and see what the experts have got to say. Remember, we're no longer looking at May now. This organization publishes figures weekly, so we're able to get a really good, up-to-date impression of what the market's doing. The seasonally adjusted purchase index decreased 4% from 1 week earlier. Mortgage rates decreased for the second week in a row as growing concerns over an economic slowdown and increased recessionary risks kept Treasury yields lower. Mortgage rates have increased sharply thus far in 2022, but have fallen 24 basis points over the past 2 weeks, with the 30-year fixed mortgage at 5.74%. Rates are still significantly higher than they were a year ago, which is why applications for home purchases and refinances remain depressed. Purchase activity is hamstrung by ongoing affordability challenges and low inventory. I remain confident that these increasing interest rates will not cripple the market and will not cause a major downturn in home prices. But we will instead begin to see appreciation slow down from the unsustainable double-digit percentage increases we've been seeing for the last few years to the much more sustainable low single-digit appreciation growth. And we will also see the market swing from an extreme seller's market to a much more middle balanced market. I don't think we're pivoting to a buyer's market just yet. This all highlights what I said before when I said you have to price your home right if you're thinking about selling. It feels like we're at an inflection point in the market where people are becoming more price conscious as their budget gets eaten away by interest rates. And you need to consider that if you decide to list your home for sale. Now let's look at my local market, Spokane. These are actual sales for June. Sales were down 6.1% year over year. Median home prices have actually fallen by $10,000 month over month, but continue to move upwards rapidly on a year-over-year basis, with a 15.8% in median home prices reported. It's plain to see that demand is still strong here, otherwise these double-digit year-over-year price appreciation figures would begin to start dropping off and inventory would start to increase rapidly as more homes languish on the market, unable to connect with buyers. Inventory is up to a 1.1 month supply, which is the first time I've seen inventory represented in months rather than days for a very long time. It's worth mentioning that in a balanced market, we'd be looking more at about 3 to 6 months supply, and this goes to show that we're not over the low inventory phenomenon just yet. New listings are also up year over year, which is great to see. The Spokane market remains stronger than the market nationally. So if you're a homeowner right now, it's worth remembering that you're in a market with above average demand and below average inventory. So you still have a great opportunity to list your home for sale, and as I mentioned earlier, I would love to list your home for sale if you do decide to sell. But as I mentioned when discussing pending home sales, you will have to be realistic about the state of the market when it comes to pricing your home, and not list ahead of the market. Those sellers that still believe they're likely to get multiple offers above asking and start bidding war on the first weekend they list are not in tune with the current state of the market as we see it right now. That being said, those most desirable homes in the most desirable areas are still flying off the shelf, while those homes that are either overpriced or just less desirable, are hanging out on the market for a little while, causing the pool of inventory to increase. If you're a buyer right now in Spokane, know this, that we are starting to see some reduced competition. This is a huge silver lining if you struggled to connect with a home in the last couple of years and maybe just opted to sit on the sidelines until things settle down. Right now, unfortunately, you will encounter those much higher interest rates, which will cause you to downgrade your expectations. So you're more likely to connect with a home than you would have been, say, this time last year, but you may well end up with less home than you initially envisaged when you started looking for a home. Now I wanted to move on and look at some news articles that have stood out to me this month. The first article is from the investment brokerage Fidelity. Is inflation peaking? Commodity prices have declined from recent highs. Inflation expectations have subsided somewhat as well. Stocks will likely continue to reflect inflation risks over the near term. There may not be many positive catalysts to drive the market higher over the short term, especially while several more interest rate hikes appear to be likely down the road. But I do think there's some emerging good news. Inflation may have peaked. That would be very positive indeed, and I certainly hope inflation has peaked. Maybe if it has, that will send a signal to the rest of the market to settle down, and like I mentioned earlier, maybe mortgage rates can begin to drop on their own. Moving on to look at this next article. Experts don't believe we're in a bubble. A new Zillow survey of over 100 housing experts found that 60% of them believe we aren't in a housing bubble, compared to 32% who said we are. Further, the panel of experts also believe we will see a short recession by 2024, as well as continued home price growth throughout 2022 due to strong demand. In discussing home price growth, Zillow found that looking forward, the most optimistic quartile of respondents predicted prices would rise 46.1% between now and the end of 2026, while the most conservative quartile predicted a cumulative rise of only 9.3% in that time. On average, respondents are forecasting a 26.4% cumulative rise by the end of 2026. And that's what I wanted to highlight to you when I said earlier that home prices are unlikely to decline anytime soon, and if that's putting you off buying, it really shouldn't. Next, I did want to highlight some uneasy news in the real estate market. A couple of lenders have shut their door recently, and the most recent is Sprout. I came to learn about this as a listing I have under contract has been impacted by this closure. I can't cover it in too much depth, as there's not really that much information known just yet. However, I always do try to bring you the good, the bad, and the ugly on this channel. Lastly, I wanted to bring you an update on the Spokane housing market. Last year, the mayor issued a housing crisis proclamation highlighting the worrying lack of what she terms middle housing. Those are the townhomes, the duplexes, the triplexes of this world. She highlighted some policy proposals, including the need to relax things like ADU laws here in Spokane and increase housing density. Since then, not really much has happened, but here's an update. Spokane Mayor Nadine Woodward and her staff unveiled a series of emergency changes and expanded zoning opportunities she will ask the City Council to adopt immediately in an effort to address Spokane's housing crisis. And she comments, "It is absolutely critical we address Spokane's housing crisis. It won't happen overnight, but we absolutely must get started." I hope we do get some action on these proposals, as well as the previously mentioned ADU proposals, as these measures would certainly help alleviate some of the pressure on housing. It has to be said though that these measures are likely just to increase the pool of available rentals in the city, not encourage home ownership, which as we know is one of the best wealth building tools out there. Now let's try piece all this information together and summarize the market as we see it in July 2022. The big news is that interest rates are staying in the 5s, inflation seems to be peaking in the 8s, and home prices are still expected to gain, but at a much more moderate level. On top of this, more inventory seems to be coming online too, addressing the historic low inventory we've been seeing. Sales are down here in Spokane, and we continue to see rapid year-over-year median home price appreciation. We still have low inventory here, but we are seeing the pool of available homes to purchase increasing, as well as more listings come online. The playing field in the game of buyers versus sellers is beginning to level. It's too soon to tell if we've swung into a buyer's market just yet. If a buyer's market does transpire, it will be short-lived, as eventually mortgage rates will come back down and demand will increase again. Speculation aside, I think we are beginning to see the return of a balanced market where people can actually do normal things like move without all the aggravation we've been seeing in the last few years. That's it for this video. I hope you gained from this video. If you did, please like and subscribe. That really does help me out. If you are planning on selling your Spokane area home, then please reach out to me. I would be honored to list your home for sale. And if you are planning on buying here in the Spokane area, I'd be honored to work with you too. To contact me, just give me a call, shoot me a text, or send me an email.